Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Millennium TV News. This is Fahmida Islam with you. Before moving on, let's look at today's top stories. White House, US working to refresh Syria ceasefire. Obama hosts jazz concert at White House. Trump on protest detour, felt like I was crossing the border. Anti-Trump protest turns violent in California. Kashish on Islamic State, time to take decisive action. And situation in Bangladesh is very complex, says US. Well, those were the headlines, now the details. The White House says the US and Russia are working to renew the cessation of hostilities in Syria, despite the deadly bombing this week of a hospital in Aleppo.
Persistent violations in this area are unacceptable and damaging.
The White House said on Friday that the United States and Russia have been working to renew the cessation of hostilities in Syria, despite the deadly bombing this week of a hospital in Aleppo. Our hope is by refreshing this agreement, we can build momentum again towards a broadly observed cessation of hostilities, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said.
That there were likely to be violations of the cessation of hostilities. But what's happened over the last week or so is that the frequency of violations has increased, and that's been the source of significant concern. So our hope is that by refreshing this agreement and focusing our attention on these two particular areas, we can build momentum again toward a broadly observed cessation of hostilities.
Singer Aretha Franklin takes the stage as US President Barack Obama hosts a concert at the White House in observance of International Jazz Day.
I invited all my favorite jazz musicians.
US President Barack Obama hosted a concert at the White House on Friday in observance of International Jazz Day. He said he was introduced to jazz by his father, who took him to his first concert in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1971.
Most jazz lovers probably remember the first time this music got into our bones. For me, that happened as a child when my father, who I barely knew, came to visit me for about a month. And in the few weeks that I spent with him, one of the things that he did was take me to my first jazz concert, to see Dave Brubeck in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1971. And I didn't realize at the time the impact that it had, but the world that that concert opened up for a 10-year-old boy was spectacular, and I was hooked.
I've been so many places in my life and time. Sang a lot of songs, and I made some bad rhymes. I've acted out my life. Remember when we worked together.
Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump, known for his hardline stand on illegal immigration, says it felt like he was crossing the border after protesters forced him to make a detour in California.
So nice. That was not the easiest entrance I've ever made.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump says it felt like I was crossing the border after protesters forced him to take a detour in California. Trump's motorcade had to pull over on the side of the road next to the hotel where the frontrunner was set to speak to a group of Republicans. Trump could be seen getting out of his SUV and walking along a jersey wall to enter the hotel through a back door. About 300 people gathered outside the state Republican convention in Burlingame, south of San Francisco. Protesters who held signs and Mexican flags at one point rushed security gates, and police officers had their batons out. Chaotic scenes broke out on Thursday outside a Trump rally at the Country Fairgrounds in Costa Mesa, California. Media reported that anti-Trump protesters smashed the window of a police patrol car and blocked traffic. Some 20 people were arrested. Trump has won a following among Republican voters in the United States, along with ardent critics for his hardline stand on illegal immigration. He has accused Mexico of sending drug dealers and rapists across the U.S. border and promised to end it by building a wall and making Mexico pay for it.
My wife called. She said, there are helicopters following you, and we did, and then we went under a fence and through a fence, and oh boy, I felt like I was crossing the border, actually. You know, it's true. I was crossing the border, but I got here. They said, Mr. Trump, it would be really much easier, sir, if you just didn't speak today and just left and go back immediately to Indiana. And I said, you know, we can't let these people down, right? Do we agree? We can't do it.
About 20 protesters were arrested on Thursday night outside a Donald Trump rally in Southern California, where the Republican presidential frontrunner was vowing to get tough on illegal immigration. Protesters smashed the window of a police car and large crowds faced off against officers in riot gear. The violence erupted outside a campaign rally in Costa Mesa, California, for Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump. Many were waving Mexican flags to sound off against Trump's tough rhetoric on illegal immigration.
People that shouldn't have been here, people that should have never been allowed to come over the border, and they come here like it's nothing. We're going to stop it, and we're going to build a wall.
At least 20 protesters were arrested as police tried to disperse the crowd. Thousands flooded the streets outside the county fairgrounds where Trump was speaking, some blocking traffic, others destroying a police cruiser. One driver did donuts in the road, almost hitting a protester. Trump is hoping to garner support in California, where voters head to the polls for the state's Republican primary on June 7th. A strong win in California could thrust him above the delegate count needed to secure the nomination. But his tough rhetoric being met with fierce opposition in parts of California, which is home to a large Latino population.
Republican presidential candidate John Kasich says he would send U.S. ground troops into Syria to combat Islamic State and slams European bureaucracy for hampering intelligence gathering.
I would support the opposition in Syria, but I would not want to use U.S. forces in the middle of a civil war.
Republican presidential candidate John Kasich said on Friday that he would only send U.S. troops into Syria to fight Islamic State militants, but not to get involved in the country's civil war. And that has to be done quickly, the Ohio governor told the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, California. We are dripping ourselves into both Iraq and Syria, and we're taking this piecemeal approach that doesn't resolve anything, he said. The time has come to take decisive action against ISIS to destroy them. Kasich also said the U.S. needed to sit down with its European allies and tell them to get alive.
They can't even figure out how to talk to one another. I mean, think about the people that died as a result that nobody in Belgium had the good sense to take the message from Turkey and to be prepared for the introduction of this radical jihadist in Belgium. We need to get that all cleaned up over there.
The situation in Bangladesh is very complex, says the U.S. State Department, after the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda reportedly claimed responsibility for recent murders in the country. State Department spokesperson Mark Toner told in a Friday briefing that the U.S. has asked the Bangladesh government to investigate all these recent attacks and identify those responsible for them. This follows U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's phone call to Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, urging her to conduct a thorough investigation into the recent attacks, including the one on LGBT rights activist Zulhaz Mannan. Toner said Kerry also urged Hasina to redouble efforts by law enforcement agencies to protect these individuals believed to be at risk. The Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent have been claiming responsibility for the targeted killings of secular writers, online activists and liberal publishers in Bangladesh during the last 1 year. They claimed responsibility for the recent attacks on a Rajshahi University professor and a gay rights activist in Dhaka. The Bangladesh government, however, denies existence of IS or AQIS in the country and describes the killings as being masterminded by homegrown Islamist radicals. We have no reason to not believe those claims of responsibility, but what is clear is that there is a definite threat on the ground, said the State Department spokesperson. I mean, we have seen several brutal murders now over the past several weeks, and we want the government there to take every step possible to protect its citizens. During his phone call to Sheikh Hasina, Kerry said that he would send Assistant Secretary of State Nisha Desai Biswal to Dhaka to discuss ways of strengthening counter-terrorism cooperation. We'll take a short. Protests erupt in Venezuela as power crisis deepens. Syria truce comes into effect, but Aleppo excluded. US strike on Afghanistan MSF hospital, not a war crime. UN demands restoration of UN mission in Western Sahara. And vote counting underway in Iran's parliamentary runoff. Welcome back to Millennium TV News. Looting and clashes reported in several cities as queues get longer for food items while power situation looks bleak. Looting and violence have been reported in parts of Venezuela as the country faces widespread food and power shortages, forcing the government to ration food and electricity. Several towns and cities, including the second biggest city, Maracaibo, were hit by rioting on Tuesday and Wednesday after daily power cuts started from Monday. The situation is critical, said Norvelis Contreras, a 26-year-old housewife who had been queuing for 5 hours to buy rice and oil on Thursday at a supermarket in Maracaibo. "We are suffering and trying to survive," she told the media. Residents in the Caracas area of Pitar this month said they were eating more starches and skipping meals because they could not find food or afford to buy what was available.
This is the beginning of the end. We will not bear any of this anymore. We won't change.
We have reached over 1 million signatures in less than 2 days. That's 8 times what we needed. This is a great show of civility. And
Government agrees to cessation of fighting near Damascus and Latakia, but no sign of let-up in bombardment of Aleppo. The Syrian government has called local truces near Damascus and in the northern province of Latakia, but has excluded the main battlefield in Aleppo. A new regime of calm began at 1 a.m. on Saturday and is scheduled to last 1 day in the capital's eastern Ghouta suburb and 3 days in the northern countryside of the coastal province of Latakia, the army said in a statement. By excluding the city of Aleppo, scene of the worst recent violence, the narrow truces were unlikely to resurrect a ceasefire and peace talks that have collapsed this week. The surge in fighting in the city, home to more than 2 million people, showed monstrous disregard for civilian lives, the United Nations said. In the latest violence, government strikes hit 3 clinics in rebel-held districts of the city, rescue workers and sources in the city said.
Ahmed Darash, head of Al-Quds Hospital's nursing department, is still in shock and he's angry.
We lost control, we lost our nerve. We couldn't decide who to help first, our friends or the patient, and the horror of what was going on in the darkness.
Pentagon investigation says strike on MSF clinic, which killed 42 people, was a mistake and therefore not a war crime. The U.S. military has said that a deadly airstrike on a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Afghanistan last year was a mistake and therefore not a war crime. Technical and human error led to the attack, General Joseph Votel said on Friday as he presented the results of an internal investigation into the October 3 incident in the northern Afghan city of Kunduz. At least 42 people, including 24 patients, 14 staff and 4 caretakers, were killed and 37 others wounded in the airstrike, which destroyed the MSF hospital building and prompted widespread condemnation from human rights groups. The personnel involved did not know that they were striking a medical facility, the investigation report concluded. The intended target was an insurgent-controlled site which was approximately 400 meters away from the MSF Trauma Center.
This is what's left of the Doctors Without Borders Trauma Center in Kunduz. Staff say the hospital was hit several times during a sustained bombing attack. The airstrike started at 2 o'clock in the morning local time, when most of the hospital's more than 100 patients would have been asleep. In a statement, NATO says US forces conducted an airstrike in Kunduz city against individuals threatening force. The strike may have resulted in collateral damage to a nearby medical facility. This incident is under investigation.
Morocco said it would study the resolution but refused to comment on restoration of full civilian staffing levels. The UN Security Council has voted to restore the UN mission in disputed Western Sahara and bring the peacekeeping force back to full operations after Morocco expelled international civilian staff. A US drafted resolution was backed by 10 countries in the 15-member council on Friday. Venezuela and Uruguay voted against the measure, while Russia, Angola and New Zealand abstained. Morocco last month expelled dozens of civilian staffers from the MINURSO mission in angry retaliation over Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's use of the term occupation to describe the status of the territory it claims as its own. Second round of parliamentary elections will determine outcome of 68 undecided seats, with reformists eyeing gains. Counting has begun to decide the outcome of 68 seats being contested in the second round of the Iranian elections, according to local news outlets. Friday's vote was held in constituencies where no candidate managed to get more than 25% of ballots cast in the first round held in February. The Iranian Students News Agency said officials were now working on collecting ballots and aimed to finish the count by Saturday morning. President Hassan Rouhani's reformists are hoping to build on gains made in the earlier vote, which saw them pick up significantly more seats but failed to secure a majority in the 290-member assembly. Candidates backed by Rouhani won all 30 seats in the first round of the elections. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina here on Saturday morning paid rich tributes to the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The Premier stood in solemn silence for some time as a mark of profound respect to the memory of the father of the nation. Sheikh Hasina later offered Surah Fatiha. She also recited from the Holy Quran. In the Munazat, prayers were offered seeking eternal peace of the departed soul of Bangabandhu as well as other martyrs of the 15th August carnage. Nisha Desai Biswal, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, is likely to arrive here on May 4th to discuss ways how the counterterrorism cooperation between Bangladesh and the United States can be taken forward further. Biswal wants to meet Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Foreign Minister H. Mahmood Ali and Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan Kamal during the visit, said a diplomatic source. However, there is still no official announcement about the visit and her engagements are yet to be finalized. Biswal will leave on May 5, according to the source. On Thursday night, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry phoned Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and requested her to take necessary steps to bring the perpetrators of Kola Bagan murder to trial. According to the Prime Minister's press wing, John Kerry talked to Sheikh Hasina for 16 minutes. A building collapse in the capital of Kenya kills at least 3, with many more still trapped. Rescuers dig through debris to find survivors after a building collapsed in Nairobi. At least 3 people are dead. These children were lucky, but dozens more people are trapped underneath. The man's looking for his sister and her family.
They told me that the house was shaking. On arriving here, I found the house had already collapsed down.
The 6-story building toppled after days of heavy rain and floods. Protesters, many in wheelchairs, battled with riot police on the streets of La Paz, Bolivia. Riot police and protesters face off in La Paz, Bolivia. The group includes 150 disabled people and their families. They trekked across the country to pressure the government to increase their state benefits.
Lamentablemente, la policía nos han botado con agua, nos han botado con agua sucia, mojado la ropa, mojado las pocas cosas que teníamos, hasta los víveres nos los han mojado.
The government currently pays a $144 stipend annually. The protesters propose a monthly payment of $72. The Bolivian government has rejected the pay increase. Britain's Prince Harry ropes in top talent to promote the Invictus Games for disabled military personnel.
Britain's Prince Harry did the almost unthinkable. He recruited the very private Queen Elizabeth, his grandmother, for a promo video. It's for a good cause, the Invictus Games, celebrating the athleticism of disabled military veterans.
Message? Oh, from Michelle.
And he's doing it with help from the Obamas.
Would you like to watch it together?
Yes.
Let's have a look.
Hey, Prince Harry, remember when you told us to bring it at the Invictus Games?
Careful what you wish for.
Boom.
Oh, really? Please.
Boom.
The Prince and First Lady are big supporters of the Games, which start in Orlando, Florida on May 8.
The search is underway for the 13 occupants of a helicopter that crashed off Norway's west coast on Friday in an area that sees frequent helicopter traffic to and from oil installations. Resending script to correct typo in into line. Norwegian rescue services were still trying to determine the fate of the 13 passengers who were on board the helicopter when it crashed off Norway's west coast near Bergen, Norway's second largest city. One eyewitness told local news that several people could be seen in the ocean and that the helicopter itself was resting on a small island. The area just west of Bergen sees frequent helicopter traffic to and from offshore oil installations. Authorities say the chopper was on its way to shore from an oil platform, but the full extent of the damage was still unclear. North Korea's Supreme Court gives a 62-year-old Korean American 10 years of hard labor for subversion against the state. A 62-year-old Korean American Kim Dong-chul was clearly emotional as the court in Pyongyang delivered his sentence. 10 years of hard labor for subversion. It was the latest conviction of a foreigner for crimes against the isolated state.
I've fallen victim to South Korea and committed a terrible and indelible crime,
Kim told the court. North Korean news outlets said in March that Kim had admitted to and apologized for committing espionage under the direction of the U.S. and South Korean governments, including stealing military secrets. The state wanted a 15-year sentence, but Kim's defense attorney asked for leniency considering his age.
North Korea has long been criticized over its human rights record. In the past, it's used detained Americans to extract high-profile visits from the U.S. This latest conviction comes as Pyongyang prepares for its first ruling party Congress in 36 years.
The U.S. military announced it has taken disciplinary action against 16 service members over a deadly 2015 airstrike in Afghanistan that destroyed a hospital.
Importantly, the investigation concluded that the personnel involved did not know they were striking a medical facility.
The U.S. military announced on Friday that it has taken disciplinary action against 16 service members over a deadly October 3 airstrike in Afghanistan that destroyed a hospital run by the international medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières. A U.S. military investigation into the incident broadly concluded that the strike was a tragic mistake.
Misidentified and struck the Doctors Without Borders Trauma Center. The investigation determined that all members of both the ground force and the AC-130 aircrew were unaware that the aircraft was firing on a medical facility throughout the engagement. The investigation ultimately concluded that this tragic incident was caused by a combination of human errors compounded by process and equipment failures.
Braving bee stings in Gaza, an alternative therapy center is using venom from bees to treat its patients.
ابني معه توحد ودلوني يعني أهل الخير على النحل. إلي سنة ونص لقيته بعالجه في النحل، تحسن والحمد لله كثير.
U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, who lost his son to brain cancer last year, takes his crusade on cancer to the Vatican, where Pope Francis says medical research findings should be dictated by need instead of profit. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, a devout Catholic, has taken his crusade on cancer to the Vatican. He met Pope Francis for a conference on regenerative medicine, but then he got personal, making an emotional speech devoted to the loss of his 46-year-old son Beau to brain cancer last year and the support he's received from the Pope.
And I wish every grieving parent, brother, sister, mother, father, would have had the benefit of his words, his prayers, his presence. He provided us with more comfort than even he, I think, will ever understand.
Francis is calling for a major economic paradigm shift in how medical research is funded, saying it should be dictated by need instead of profit.
We need to oppose an economy of exclusion and inequality that victimizes people when the mechanism of profit prevails over that of the human life.
Both men say they want a universal effort to fight disease that puts people before profit. Biden wants to marshal private and public sector resources to help make that happen and to finally find a cure for the disease that took his son's life.
Mass immigration to wealthier countries like France and Switzerland, high unemployment and poorly paid local jobs combined with falling birth rates have caused some Portuguese parishes to lose about 3/4 of the population in the past few decades.
No shops, a grocery truck just once a week, elderly residents sharing taxis to travel many miles to the doctor. Bled by emigration, these abandoned Portuguese villages are losing all hope of surviving.
When you arrive there, it feels almost like a ghost village at first, which can be sad and slightly creepy at the same time, because some old stone houses are dilapidated and date back to the 18th century or 19th century. You spend maybe 15 minutes in the streets there and you don't see any signs of life, but then an elderly resident appears in the end of the street, usually accompanied by a dog or a donkey, and they would greet you and start talking to you.
It's all down to mass emigration to wealthier countries like France and Switzerland, high unemployment and poorly paid local jobs. A falling birth rate also means many parishes have lost up to 3/4 of their population in the last few decades.
These areas are losing people, businesses, services, the critical mass that allows the region like that, a remote region like that, to go on and to survive on its own. And this causes a vicious circle of more abandonment every time. There are no schools, no hospitals, and so people leave because of that as well.
The country's parliament deputy says that 2/3 of Portugal's territory could become depopulated. Trying to reverse the process isn't easy. In Chaves, a town of 40,000, residents have reported a trend of locals returning from larger cities, attracted by business opportunities in tourism. But for each person coming back, 100 still leave.
Government moves tens of thousands of refugees to Athens' outskirts as the summer tourist season begins to warm up. The Greek government is moving thousands of refugees from camps in central Athens to new settlements on the city's outskirts to prepare for the arrival of tourists. Greece expects 23 million visitors this year, who are expected to bring in about $20 billion in revenue. For months, the streets of the Greek capital were home to refugees from Syria and other countries, living rough as they prepared for the next step of their journeys to northern and western Europe. Makeshift refugee camps in Athens, once at the center of the refugee influx, are now disappearing as residents are buzzed out to new settlements far from the eyes of tourists on whom Greece's faltering economy relies.
I'm afraid to go there and that everyone will forget about us.
Now the business news. The clock is ticking on Puerto Rico, which has a major debt payment due on Monday. Puerto Rico simply doesn't have enough money to pay its bills. The U.S. territory has already defaulted on some smaller debt issues, but there's a large one, more than $400 million, owed by Puerto Rico's Government Development Bank, or GDB, coming due on May 1st, though they get an extra day because that falls on the weekend. The Caribbean island, which has a 45% poverty rate, is facing $70 billion in total debt.
Ted Hampton of Moody's Investor Service.
And over the last decade or so, as its economy has continually underperformed, it's relied on borrowing to pay for operating expenses. In this fiscal year, which began July 1, its debt service burden ramped up dramatically, and it simultaneously was running out of cash, and the market was saying, we won't lend you any more money to pay for operating expenses.
The governor has already said they are going to default next week. Earlier this month, he signed a law allowing him to impose a moratorium on any debt payment he deems necessary. On Thursday, the U.S. government said they are getting, quote, very close to legislation to address Puerto Rico's debt crisis, but so far, nothing has been passed.
The powers that be continued to defend ferociously a Frankenstein-like creation, a playground for financial vultures. The European debt crisis of 2010, which still has many peripheral nations in its grip and has led to what appears to be a permanent state of fiscal austerity, has exposed to the world the highly flawed and dangerous architecture of the European Monetary Union and the anti-democratic nature of European Union institutions. Still, the powers that be continued to defend ferociously a Frankenstein's monster-like creation, a playground for financial vultures, while progressive voices and otherwise critical Europeanists call for the rebuilding of Europe as they fear that without reforms, the European integration project faces potential collapse, which will lead in turn to the resurgence of old national rivalries across the continent and social chaos inside many national formations. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders calls for United Technologies to keep jobs in Indiana.
If United Technologies wants to receive another defense contract,
Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders took aim at corporate greed at a rally outside the Indiana State House. He criticized United Technologies' decision to pull more than 1,000 jobs from the state and relocate them to Mexico. Sanders, who describes himself as a democratic socialist running for the Democratic nomination, has lashed out at corporate corruption throughout his campaign for the White House.
Guys have so much power that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can alone address the crises that we face. And that is why what this campaign is about is the call for a political revolution.
Now the science, technology and environment news. A Facebook Inc. shareholder filed a proposed class action lawsuit on Friday in a bid to stop the company's plan to issue new Class C stock, calling the move an unfair deal to enrich Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg as controlling shareholder. The lawsuit filed in the Delaware Court of Chancery followed the social networking company's announcement on Wednesday of its plan to issue the shares. The rejiggering of Facebook's share structure is effectively a 3-for-1 stock split. Zuckerberg said in December that he intends to put 99% of his Facebook shares into a new philanthropy project focusing on human potential and equality. The lawsuit contends that a Facebook board committee, which approved the share deal, did not bargain hard with Zuckerberg to obtain anything of meaningful value in exchange for granting Zuckerberg added control. Astronomers have found a first-of-its-kind tailless comet whose composition may offer clues into long-standing questions about the solar system's formation and evolution, according to research published on Friday in the journal Science Advances. The so-called Manx comet, named after a breed of cats without tails, was made of rocky materials that are normally found near Earth. Most comets are made of ice and other frozen compounds and were formed in solar system's frigid far reaches. Researchers believe the newly found comet was formed in the same region as Earth, then booted to the solar system's backyard like a gravitational slingshot as planets jostled for position. We'll take a short break. A blind lion, one that is missing an eye, and 31 others that had worked in circuses began the journey to a South African wildlife sanctuary from Lima, Peru on Friday in what their rescuers call the biggest transfer of animals in captivity ever undertaken. These lions have endured hell on earth and now they are heading home to paradise. This is a world for which nature intended these animals for, Jan Kramer, president of Animal Defenders International, said in a statement. It is a perfect ending to ADI's operation, which has eliminated circus suffering in another country. The organization said it rescued 24 of the lions in surprise raids on circuses in Peru. Now the entertainment news. For a few moments at the White House on Friday, the West Wing TV series came back to life as actress Allison Janney, who played fictional White House spokeswoman C.J. Craig, took the podium at the daily press briefing. Janney's appearance was a stunt meant to highlight Saturday's White House Correspondents' Dinner, a glitz-filled annual event which draws celebrities and power brokers alike. Janney, whose character served as press secretary to fictional President Jed Bartlet in the televised drama, peppered her remarks with inside jokes from the show as she beat White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest to the briefing. "Josh is out today. He has, I believe it's a root canal," she said, referencing a root canal that sidelines her character. "But let's be honest, I'm better at this than he is." She said she had a message from President Barack Obama. Filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola honored in Hollywood with a hand and footprint ceremony at TCL Chinese Theater. Francis Ford Coppola was honored Friday morning in Hollywood, cementing his status as a legendary filmmaker with a hand and footprint ceremony at the TLC Chinese Theater. The 77-year-old Oscar-winning director, whose 50 years of career is highlighted by 5 Academy Awards and such iconic titles as Patton, Godfather and Apocalypse Now, was joined by his family and friends at the ceremony.
Styles for art or movies or these works that we are involved in change over time, and maybe 40 years ago people might not have quite appreciated, say, a film like Apocalypse Now, which was very kind of unusual to say the least. And so I had to go through a lot of years of people saying, well, that's too crazy and it's not like the movies we're seeing, etc. But over time, you know, time will tell. If you're looking as an artist for some sort of assurance that what you're doing is okay, or at least in the right direction, I think you have to wait for the judgment of time before you know.
Coppola added that he hopes his films are remembered for expressing the here and now. Friday's ceremony honoring the director as part of the 2016 TCM Classic Film Festival, which runs through Sunday.
Pop star Kesha releases her first new music in 3 years after losing a legal battle to scrap her recording contract with Sony Music and producer Dr. Luke. Pop star Kesha has released her first new music in 3 years after losing a legal battle to scrap her recording contract with Sony Music and producer Dr. Luke, whom she has accused of sexual assault. The single True Colors was released through the singer's label RCA Records, a unit of Sony Music Entertainment, and Dr. Luke's Kemozabe Records, to which Kesha is still signed to. She took to Twitter to announce that True Colors spoke to me so deeply I had to spread the beautiful message of personal empowerment. True Colors is already at number 8 in the iTunes US top-selling songs chart. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge celebrate their nuptials 5 years after royal wedding. Britain's Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, Prince William and his wife Catherine, celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary on Friday. The pair tied the knot in Westminster Abbey on April 29, 2011 in a televised ceremony watched by millions around the world. The couple have 2 children, Prince George, born on July 22, 2013, and Princess Charlotte, who turns 1 on May 2. Swedish Oscar-winning actress Alicia Vikander scoops the coveted role of Lara Croft in new Tomb Raider movie, according to reports. Not content with winning one of the biggest awards in Hollywood, Swedish actress Alicia Vikander has now landed one of the most coveted roles. According to reports, she has beaten off numerous other stars to become the gun-toting, adventuring archaeologist Lara Croft in the reboot of Tomb Raider. Lara Croft became an instantaneous gaming icon when she burst on the scene in the Tomb Raider PlayStation games, famous for her double pistols and curves. No release date has been revealed yet, but it's been reported that Norwegian Roar Arthog will be in the director's chair.
Angelina Jolie was the original actress to play the character in Lara Croft Tomb Raider, which is still one of the highest-grossing action films with a female lead. So Alicia has got a lot to live up to.
Now the sports news. Luke Walton, the new head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers, will leave the league's hottest team to take charge of an acclaimed NBA franchise that has fallen on hard times and currently occupies the other end of the spectrum. Despite being tasked with an unenviable rebuilding job, it is an opportunity he felt he could hardly turn down. Currently in his second season as assistant coach at the reigning NBA champion Golden State Warriors, Walton was confirmed as Byron Scott's replacement on Friday. Scott was ditched after the Lakers went 17-65 in the recently completed season, otherwise known as the Kobe Bryant Farewell Tour. Arsenal boss Arsene Wenger claims his commitment to the club helped secure the bank loans required to fund the Emirates Stadium. Fans are set to protest this weekend after a disappointing season that has seen the Gunners' Premier League title challenge fade. "When we built the stadium, the banks demanded that I sign for 5 years," said the 66-year-old Frenchman. Construction began on the £390 million Emirates Stadium in 2004, the year Wenger won the last of his 3 league titles with the club. "The banks wanted the technical consistency to guarantee that we have a chance to pay them back," added Wenger, who has been in charge of the North Londoners since 1996.
I think this club has special values, and we care about the club, and we care about our fans as well, and we try to keep everybody happy. You have to put things a little bit into perspective and see how the club's evolution has gone over the years. And I believe that it was not always easy. And the quality of the work we done at the club got them today in a strong position where the expectation level is very high.
When the Indiana Pacers are more than all-star forward Paul George's prolific scoring, they usually are difficult to beat. George had a game-best 21 points and 11 rebounds Friday, but the Pacers used smothering defense, solid rebounding, and a dominating second half to defeat the Toronto Raptors 101-83 in Game 6, tying the best-of-7 series 3-3 and forcing Game 7 on Sunday in Toronto. After leading 65-64 late in the third quarter, Indiana used a 32-5 run to increase its lead to 97-69 with 3-2 remaining. Indiana limited the Raptors to 36.7% shooting, only 39 second-half points, and out-rebounded Toronto 44-40, also scoring 20 points as a result of 17 Raptors turnovers. Let's have a look at Millennium TV News Recap. White House, U.S. working to refresh Syria ceasefire. Obama hosts jazz concert at White House. Trump on protest detour, felt like I was crossing the border. Anti-Trump protest turns violent in California. Kasich on Islamic State, time to take decisive action. And situation in Bangladesh is very complex, says US. You are up to date with our top stories so far here on Millennium TV, and don't forget to log into www.millenniumtv.net. Thank you for staying with us. Allah Hafiz.